Our chairman has just joined, Dr. Adeoye Adefulu. Welcome, chairman. This will be now proceed. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thanks for joining us and for birthing this weekly business webinar.
Good afternoon, Mr.
It's a pleasure. Sorry, I didn't, I got my login mixed up, but I've been here for a few minutes now. Thanks.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure if you saw the program, but if not, we have, but you've seen the flyers to who the panelists and presenters are. So we'll just kick off the event, if you don't mind, sir.
Excellent. Please go ahead.
Rex, are we starting now?
Yes, please.
You've allowed everybody in?
Yes, everybody's involved.
Okay. So I'll just start off. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. You are welcome to the 11th edition of the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law webinar. Today we will be a business law weekly session. The webinar topic for today is called Cabotage vessel financing, the indices for disbursement. My name is Adedoyin Afun, and co-moderating this webinar today with me is Kashima Natusumba. Without further ado, we would like to just jump into the program for the webinar today. We would like to invite our chair of the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law, Dr. Adeoye Adefulu, to please give us his brief remarks. Thank you very much. Chair, the floor is yours.
I have to apologize, and good afternoon, everyone. I must apologize because I'm not used to actually giving remarks for this, and I don't want to take too much of your time. But just to thank everyone, thank the Maritime Committee for putting this together, and to thank the speakers for agreeing to attend. I am certainly looking forward to learning about how to access the CBFF. I don't have a vessel yet, but perhaps I should be looking into that. So looking forward to the session, and thank you to everybody, and thanks to the audience for attending as well. Bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adefulu. Moving on quickly, I will just, like I'm following on from what the chair said, we are grateful for having you here. We have over 80 people attending. It shows the interest in the sector, and we were talking about that in more details as to how important the maritime sector is to the Nigerian economy. Joining me to discuss the topic, cabotage vessel financing, indices for disbursement, are four gentlemen. One of them will be presenting a paper on the topic, and the other three will be answering questions and telling us a lot more about the sector and the topic of today. The first person who will be presenting is Mr. Bello Tuku. Mr. Bello Tuku is Managing Director of River Lake Shipping Nigeria. He has over a decade experience in chartering and shipbroking across several countries. He's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Shipbrokering and is also a chartered shipbroker. Mr. Tuku is currently undertaking the MBA, the Blue MBA it's called, in shipping and logistics at the esteemed Copenhagen Business School. The next person we have here is Mr. Richard Nebedion. He is the head oil and gas, business and commercial clients of Stanbic IBTC Bank PLC. He has nearly 2 decades experience in corporate banking at Business School. Third panelist is Mr. Sheson Subowale, my learned colleague. He's the head of legal services at Union Bank of Nigeria PLC. He has over 2 decades experience working in industry. He was former company secretary and corporate relations director at Guinness Nigeria PLC / Diageo. He's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, and is also an associate of the Chartered Institute of Taxation. Last but not least is Mr. Sharma Ezekiel. He's the head corporate and energy banking at United Bank of Africa PLC. and he has over 2 decades experience in the banking industry. Mr. Ezekiel is an alumnus of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, United States. Ladies and gentlemen, you would agree with me that we have a stellar cast today to do justice to the topic. And without further ado, I will invite Mr. Bello Tuku to please make his presentation.
Hello, good afternoon, fellow panelists, and good afternoon, Mr. Doyne, and thank you very much for inviting me on this interesting topic. So just to give you a brief description of who we are at River Lake. River Lake is a shipbroking company involved in tankers, bulk carriers, as well as offshore support. We also provide market intelligence and data tracking for our clients, as well as publish index, which is part of our intelligence business. Other things we do involve the building of terminals and SBMs, where we have a team in Rotterdam that deals with project management. So we're headquartered in Geneva, and we have offices in other major maritime centers in London, here in Lagos, in Rotterdam, and also in Oman. Coming into the Nigerian shipping market, it's very important to actually understand what actually drives the demand for shipping in Nigeria. So Nigeria is one of the major oil producers, as you know, in the world, and also a big major exporter. But due to under-functioning refineries, Nigeria imports majority of its petroleum products to meet its energy demand. And 51% of all petroleum products imported into West Africa are destined for Nigeria. So if you look at the NNPC statistical bulletin of all the gasoline imports, which has been, of course, the major commodity that is consumed in Nigeria, with 70% of our petroleum product consumption and demand making up gasoline, making up that particular is the major commodity, energy commodity that we consume. So if you look at the trend since 2011, we have seen an increase in gasoline consumption over the years. And due to that, we have seen more and more product imports into Nigeria. And for that reason as well, this is also driving the demand for shipping in the country, especially into the major river ports in Warri and Calabar, which are also major demand centers to push some of the cargoes into the hinterlands in the country. Of course, this demand is also driven by petroleum subsidy, which has been in existence for decades. And well, I guess we might see some form of deregulation in the near future, but these also actually have a major impact on Nigeria's gasoline consumption. So going to the next slide. So going to the next slide, we can see what has happened with the fleet of the cabotage ships. Historically, most Nigerian owners invested in intermediate-sized vessels, which usually range between 10,000 to about 18 or 20,000 deadweight. However, in the last few years, as gasoline consumption has been on an increase, we have seen this trend change to more demand for MR and the handy size tankers. So we've seen more investment from Nigerian owners in that particular sector. However, due to the fact that Nigeria is a major second-hand market for ships, we don't see owners investing in new tonnage due to the capital outlay and the amount of capital actually required for the business. Most owners tend to buy second-hand tonnage. So if you see, we have an average age of 19 years for most of the MRs that we have operating in our waters today. And also for the intermediate size, we have an average age of 15 to 16 years. So which basically tells you that this market is a cash market, and probably due to lack of available finance, most owners who actually go into the market to purchase ships are required to buy their assets in cash. And for that reason, they are mostly driven by price. Is it a good thing? I would say yes and no. Reason being, if you're trading mostly on the second-hand market, it does work in this part of the world. However, it's also getting a little bit more difficult as safety measures and conventions are on the increase, not just in Nigeria, but globally. And for that reason, most ship owners who are importing these petroleum products require vessels to be of a younger age, mainly for their own vetting purposes, ships over 15 years. So that can be a major hindrance in the market, and it's something that needs to be addressed going forward. Next slide, please. So if we look at the earnings for ships around the area, it's so here what you're seeing is the River Lake West Africa Tanker Index, just basically showing you a historical perspective of what is happening as regards to movement in cross West Africa for 15,000 ton parcels and 10,000 parcels, which are mostly the volumes that we normally ship in this part of the world. Of course, when COVID struck, we saw the shipping market decline. And within that period, because there was less energy demand, so definitely rates were not really on the up. However, at the back end of February last year, when the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine, freight rates began to go up. And that's because, of course, some ships where Russian ships especially could not trade in the market, so they were taken out, and we also had the effects of the post-COVID recovery. So if you look at the trend, it has been on an upward trend, if you like, and that has sort of been maintained for practically the whole of last year and also this year. In fact, we've never seen this type of rates. We expect the market will still remain strong, unless, of course, there is some form of surrender or truce between Russia and Ukraine, which will probably have an adverse effect on this. Next slide, please. So it's important for us to look at the asset prices on a global perspective. So of course, as we mentioned, the major things that actually drive this are the rates and also availability of tonnage. The tanker market itself saw a negative downturn when COVID-19 broke out, and of course that saw asset values for most of 2020 decrease. That's mainly because the market wasn't very buoyant. There was less movement of cargoes around the world. So generally, the freight rates were also very low. And the fact that freight rates were very low, that also affected asset prices. As the market began to recover and we started opening up post the pandemic, we started seeing the market turn. And then, of course, the war in Russia also saw a spike in asset values as some ships, especially the Russian ships, taken out of the market. Also, the container market, which was in high demand during COVID, when the demand for goods actually outweighed the demand for services, saw a massive order book for container vessels and a decrease in the order book for the for tankers and other types of vessels. So currently, second-hand prices have also been at their strongest, mainly because there's been a huge distortion in the market. Not many owners are building, and also with new technologies coming into the market, especially now that we're talking about sustainable shipping. Most owners who are looking to actually build new tonnage are looking at the type of fuel for the future. So are they going to invest in ships that are going to be burning hydrogen, ammonia, or would they be investing in ships for normal conventional fuel? Because don't forget, these projects are typically for the next 20 years. And whatever investment you need to make on a new building is going to have an adverse effect on that. Next slide, please. So now just to touch on the offshore market. Of course, Nigeria is an oil producer. We have some fields offshore where we produce some offshore oil. So definitely there is a demand for offshore support vessels like the platform supply vessels and the anchor handlers, etc. This section of the market has not really seen a good positive earnings for a long time. This is due to the fact that the American shale oil revolution started, and that saw America become a bit more energy sufficient. And for that reason, it affected some of the big oil producing countries, especially us here in West Africa, who were relying on America as one of the main markets where we sell our oil. The offshore industry has not seen any investment for new buildings because there was a massive oversupply when the market actually nosedived in 2015. This was due to the fall in oil prices, and that was sustained for quite a long time. So we saw a lot of ships laid up, some were cold stacked, some warm stacked. Of course, now with the with post-COVID and also energy demand from other sources and not from Russia, we are seeing more oil exploration activities. So rig counts are going up. And for that reason, you're seeing more demand for offshore support activity. So this has sort of in the short term helped the market to recover, and rates have also gone up due to this, and there was like gradual increase from 2021 all the way up to now. So if of course the oil prices remain quite strong, probably closer to the $90 to $100 a barrel, then we will see the offshore support market remain strong over the short to medium term. But as regards to new investments in the offshore industry, we're not really seeing much on that because there's less appetite, not just from the financiers, but also from the owners themselves. And secondly, there's an emerging market in the offshore wind industry, where offshore wind has now become the new area of investment, especially for Western Europe, as a lot of these countries are looking to transit from using fossil fuel to greener and cleaner energy. So, in a nutshell, I would probably say the outlook for Nigerian shipping is very positive. Is quite robust. What is important is we want to see Nigerian shipping actually evolve to the new with new global best practices, i.e., we want to see more support from financial houses who would in turn want to support the market in terms of giving longer term finance and better support. And I would, I think I would I'll stop here. So if anybody needs any information regarding River Lake, you can visit us on our website, www.riverlake.ch. We also publish the River Lake Tanker Index, which you can access. If you visit our website, you'll be able to see all the rates across different segments, especially on the tankers on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bello Tuko, for that brief overview of the markets and the opportunities there too. We're very grateful. I'm sure we have a lot of questions for you. I urge the participants, if you have any questions, kindly post them in the Q&A box, and we will direct them at the relevant party shortly. Bello, I know we have some questions for you from the fallout of your presentation, but we will come back to you shortly. At this junction, I'd like to invite the Vice Chair of the Maritime Committee, person of Ms. Kashima Tsumba, to please provide an overview of the cabotage regime for us, just to guide us and for the benefit of those that don't know what the cabotage regime entails and why we are looking at financing vessels in this aspect. So over to you, Kashima.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this event. We're just going to talk a bit about cabotage. It's going to be very brief, just like 5 minutes. Cabotage is the transport of goods or passengers between two places within the same country. Nigeria in 2003 enacted the Cabotage Act, and the essence of it was to reduce foreign participation in Nigerian waters. Those who have been involved in the industry know that there was a waiver system, and because of that, there was still quite a bit of foreign participation. What the Cabotage Act did was that it included a cabotage vessel financing fund. And the essence of the fund was to put together some funding, some money to shore up indigenous participation in shipping. So a percentage was paid in there by all involved in the businesses, so that at the end of the day, we could then finance vessels for indigenous players in the industry. Now, what happened through the years was from 2003 till about this year, there was a lot of talk about the CVFF. And of course, the skeptics in the industry felt that this will never come to pass. And it was like, this golden goose is there and we've never seen any disbursements. So at some point, the government, 17 years after, federal government has then said there will be disbursement of the funds. And there are 5 designated banks. Now, this is supposed to be done in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance, NIMASA, and CBN. The whole essence of this seminar is the indices for disbursement and the financing. So that's why we've invited people from the banking industry to tell us a bit more about this. What's the criteria? What do you do to qualify? And what is the yardstick? So at this point, I would like to turn to the panelists, tell us a bit more. Do you want to take it from here?
Thank you very much, Kashimana. Just to add to what Kashimana said, we took inspiration from the upcoming CVFF disbursement, but we also thought to look at it that since 2003 to date, whilst there was no disbursement of that CVFF, somebody else was meeting the gap. So as much as CVFF is a counterpart funding from the fund and the selected PLIs, certain other agencies or banks were already providing this, most needed financing to the shipping industry. So I will be directing my first question to Mr. Richard Inegbedon. To Mr. Inegbedon, going by your experience, just pull up my questions here. Yeah. Can you just give us a bit of a rundown as to your bank's take and view for the shipping industry? Or I know you guys have been into financing for a while. What kind of financing have you been doing, and what do you see going forward as a bank in this sector? I can see a nice picture of the rig there and everything. So you know what you can tell us some more, please.
Okay, yeah. So thank you again for this opportunity. My name is Richard Inegbedion, and Stanbic IBTC Bank, like you've said, pre-CVFF, we've been in the market supporting this sector and the entire oil and gas value chain. Permit me to just talk about our heritage as a bank and the things that we've done in the market. Stanbic IBTC Bank is a member of the Standard Bank Group. Standard Bank is the largest bank in Africa by asset size. And this gives you a view of our heritage as an institution and our capacity. Stanbic IBTC Bank is AAA rated, and we've been active in the sector, supporting clients in this space. Our services in this space, cuts across oil and gas, maritime, renewable energy. And in the last few years, we've significantly increased our footprint in the market. And to enable us to serve our clients, we've got a dedicated desk for maritime, and have successfully closed out on various vessel-related transactions, ranging from specialized cargo ships to floating production units, oil tankers of various sizes, operating locally and some in the international market. And we've also, over time, supported our clients in financing offshore support and service vessels. In the last 3 years, we have successfully closed out on various acquisitions, like I said earlier, and we've been able to grow our client base. And one of our client controls about 25% market share of the wet cargo market. Land rigs as well were there. We've supported our clients, in acquiring land rigs. Our client controls about 25% of the total land rigs that you have in country today. This cut across, even in the oil service space, from hydraulic workover units to various marine assets that is required to deliver value in the upstream space. As a bank, over the years, we've been able to develop the right competence in the marine space. We have specialists manning the marine decks for us in Stanbic IBTC Bank. We leverage on our franchise as a holding company, which enables us to provide a bouquet of financial services ranging from investment banking to general commercial business and other ancillary support services. We're in close touch with the market. We've built relationships and partnerships with industry participants, which include external solicitors that we typically work with.
Richard, let me come in here a bit before it looks as if you are doing the pitch. With all this array of debts from your bank,
yes.
I would, as a layman, assume that you guys are, from the picture Bello has painted, the opportunities in the market, you guys are just financing everything. But what can you guide us as to what you look at before you actually do an investment? Because we want to know, yes, you've pointed us out that you have the financial capability, you have the knowledge, know-how, you have a specialized desk, which would be wind out of one of my questions. But what do you really look at before you disburse? Because I'm sure we have owners here, we have people advising owners, we have shipbrokers, insurance people. They want to understand, what is the bank looking at? Do I need to have a contract? Do I need to be known in industry? Just give us briefly in 1 minute what you look at to disburse. Thank you.
Okay, so very quickly, and thanks for the question. The beauty of banking business in general is that the basic tenet of lending remains the same. And elementary speaks to the character of the obligor that we're dealing with, the capacity of the client, collateral, of course, the requirements, capital and the condition attached to the facility type that we're providing. But in no particular order for shipping, the first thing that we typically would consider is the experience, of the client that we are dealing with. It's a specialized market. I would typically, rely on the obligor from an experience perspective. So you must be entrenched in the market. You must have a view of what is happening in the market. You must be a market participant to enjoy, funding support in the marine space. Again, very important for us is the capacity of the obligor. Again, you agree with me. In fact, in recent times, the value of vessels have increased. Minimum 15,000 metric tons, about $20 to $25 million. So it's capital intensive. So what we typically look at in this space again is the balance sheet size of the company that we are lending to. We typically will look at your existing cash flow. We want to be sure if your existing cash flow can support repayment. I will also walk through the process with you of stress testing, cash flows that the vessel that you want to finance will generate. So that speaks to the capacity of the obligor or the client that we're dealing with per time. You mentioned it already. Offtake is also a critical part of the conversation for us. We're more comfortable when you have, a specific offtaker that would work with you, take the vessel for you and guarantee proceeds throughout the life of the transaction with us. Again, this is not to say we are not unaware of the opportunities in the spot market. We typically walk through the process with clients because we know it's more profitable to deal in the spot market than to, tie yourself into a firm contract for a long term. Of course, we also lend responsibly. Collateral is a consideration as a regulatory requirement. We typically will look at the level of collateral, and considerations can be made in between. We typically do not focus on collateral as the primary source of repayment. It's just a secondary fallback position for us. And
thank you very much, Richard. At this point, let me ask some of the other panelists, because you've laid us down. I know Kashimana was going to ask some questions for Mr. Shogwale, but I think she just dropped off there briefly. Mr. Shogwale, please, I'd like to invite you to join the conversation at this point. I know Union Bank has been around for a long time. Union Bank, we grew up knowing the wonderful white horse. Can you tell us where Union Bank is right now, following your rebranding and restructuring in the last few months, particularly as it focuses on the shipping financing sector? And then more following from that, can you tell us what form of securities other than ship mortgages your bank takes? So that Richard has told us a few indices that they look at, which I believe said is general across the industry, but if there's anything you want to add, I wanted to ask you more from the security point of view, because as you lend, you want to be sure that you have some form of security. The floor is yours, Mr. Shogwale, and thanks for joining us.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Adedoyin, for that question. As you and I'm sure most of our audience are aware, Union Bank has undergone a restructuring, which has led to a change in its majority shareholders in the last 1 year. But all of that is behind us at the moment. We have a new management at the executive level, focused on implementing its strategy for the short and the near term. And essentially, we're very ambitious to grow the franchise. and become a bigger player in every sector of the economy. But speaking specifically to the maritime sector and to your question around security that we would take when we're lending to players in this sector. I mean, as your question implies, we would, typically take ship mortgages, but in addition to that, we will be looking to domiciliation contract or proceeds contract from obligations to be serviced by the vessels. We would look at personal guarantees of the principal promoters of the business. And where some of these promoters are corporate entities, we will look at corporate guarantees. In suitable cases, we will consider shared charges, and then we will look at negative pledges. So it will really depend on the circumstances, but these are some of the bouquet of securities that we will consider in any maritime vessel finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shibole. What has been your experience with enforcing securities? This is a tie-off from one of the questions by one of the speakers here, where they wanted to understand, just to find out what has been your experience with enforcing securities. I know Bello mentioned the need for banks to start looking at alternatives from the usual ones. So I just want to get your own experience, and I'll ask if you have any comments on his recommendation for banks to not just do the usual thing. So thank you very much, sir.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So first, I mean, when you consider enforcement, I mean, the way out is always the way in. So the starting point is, perfecting your security, because if you don't get that right, then obviously when you are now want to realize, you could, get into some model along the way. Some of the other challenges would be the delay, general delay in the dispute resolution process. Obviously, if you have tidied up your collateralization, you typically shouldn't have any business to do with dispute resolution. But we know our market. I mean, people, obligors will go to court after taking your money, and they seem to have relative ease in persuading, judges to grant interim orders, many times ex parte, and essentially aimed at tying the hands of the fund provider. And then when you then get into that process, obviously all of the inefficiencies around running anything in Nigeria, any business, including, public sector business, like the administration of justice, will kick in. You don't have enough judges, they are overburdened. Most of them still take records, writing longhand, and so on and so on. And even the general infrastructure or the environment in which the judges or the players in the administration of justice sector work also lead to delay in these in enforcement. And then lastly, I'd just like to mention the lack of role definition for different players in the sector. I mean, the maritime sector is one sector where there are a lot of players, lots of associations and institutes and all kinds of things, and people play, very shadowy roles, in the industry. And, many of these agents just get in the way. And like you typically experience if you want to do business in central Lagos and the market, if you don't essentially manage all of these shadowy, stakeholders, you may not move fast enough to enforce. So these are some of the challenges that we've seen around enforcement. But I mean, like a business that's rooted in Nigeria and has been here for over 100 years, we have learned, to manage and to navigate the choppy seas and ensure that our depositors' funds are saved and are recovered when loans go bad or obligors become delinquent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shibole. I'll just ask you one brief question. As a legal practitioner and head of the legal unit, shipping generally as an industry worldwide uses maritime arbitration as mostly grounds for dispute resolution. What is your take as to using arbitration? We have very, very prominent maritime arbitration associations like MAN and members of MAN who are also members of the CIR. What's your take on using arbitration in your clauses? And also, like talking about what Bello mentioned, most mortgages give you the power to take over the assets. And from what Bello was saying was that we might start thinking of the way whereby if the asset is not performing, the bank can appoint managers to run the operations with a view to not just arresting it and keeping it there in abeyance. Your quick thoughts on this will be most appreciated, Mr. Shubwale.
Okay, so to your first question, I mean, we have huge respect for arbitration practitioners, and indeed, in the last couple of years, we have updated our template offer letters for all facilities to include arbitration clauses. You know, given the frustration that ourselves and other players in the market have experienced with the traditional dispute resolution mechanism. And therefore, we will embrace arbitration. We do know that there's a well-developed maritime arbitration sector, if I may call it that, of the legal profession. And many of them have been engaged in international arbitration around in the industry previously. So as we get a bit more bullish around lending to this sector with the coming into place of the CCVFF, we're looking to use arbitration to resolve some of the disputes that we'll see. Now, to your second question around enforcement, I don't think it's quite correct that we will typically enforce rather than consider, appointing a receiver manager. But one observation, and perhaps a quick a challenge to the growing insolvency practice in the country. Now, many insolvency practitioners have only one silver bullet, in my experience, which is, go in, kick out the owners of the business, take it over, strip it, and sell the assets. Now, increasingly, what I think is required, not just in this sector, but across the economy, are insolvency practitioners who could, live up to the name receiver manager, and essentially, take over the asset and manage and nurse back those businesses to good health. Now, I mean, I recognize that may not be the natural forte of lawyers, but to the extent that the receiver manager step into the role of, the board of directors, for example, I mean, they can hire managers who can run this operation and ensure that, the debts are paid, and perhaps, that business is then sold, to third parties in a healthy condition or returned back to the obligor. And happily, I mean, in the last few years, we have had a few instances, not in this sector, but in other sectors where receiver managers have been appointed and they have then stepped in and managed the businesses back to good health. I mean, to sufficient good health to be able to sell them as going concern. And I think that the insolvency practitioners in Nigeria should be looking at, upskilling and, a change of mindset around their understanding of their mandates when they are instructed, to take over assets and realize security.
Sorry, Bello, I know you had an opinion on this. Do you agree with Mr. Shubwale's position as to receiver manager, or is that what you are trying to say, or is it more of just an agent, not necessarily a receiver manager, but a ship manager? Can you just speak to it briefly so that before we move on?
Okay, thank you very much. From experience and what I've actually seen is most times that there is when banks decide to exercise their rights as mortgagees to actually take over assets, they have gone about it the wrong way. I can give you a classic example. In 2017, we approached one of the banks who had 2 assets that were repossessed, and we had an opportunity to actually put that asset in a different market entirely. So the proposal to the bank was, okay, why don't you look at this business on the business case, leaving the asset offshore isn't the right, because of course you have crew costs, you have maintenance costs, etc. Why don't you give the asset to a particular company for a period of 5 years, where they have access to a market not in Nigeria or outside Nigeria, and they can trade the vessel. First, one of the major benefits is you would preserve the asset, so you won't lose the asset, and secondly, you start recovering some money. So the ship manager would put together a new sort of management structure, both technical and commercial, and be able to trade that. So that way the asset is preserved over that period, rather than having the asset being under the custody of the court. So these practices more or less end up in the assets depreciating further and the banks actually losing their money. So I believe that's a practice that the banks should learn from previous experience, because we've seen a lot of people who have taken loans to buy ships, especially in Nigeria, over the years, struggle to pay back. Well, mainly because probably the tenure of the loan is short, lack of proper commercial management of the ship, and thirdly, not meeting their obligations on time. And we believe the banks should have a different approach to it, rather than the hostile approach of just taking over the asset and putting it in the custody of the courts.
Thank you, very much, Bello. My co-moderator is back, Kashimana. So Kashimana, over to you. I know we are going to draw Mr. Chama Ezekiel into the forum and have his thoughts. Over to you, Kashimana.
All right then. Mr. Chama Ezekiel, what monetary policies or fiscal incentives, particularly from CBN, can be introduced to encourage existing participants or new players in the Nigerian shipping sector in regards to ship acquisitions?
Okay, thank you. In terms of monetary policy, I think there's so much the CBN can do. There were certain windows that were given to banks to help with respect to manufacturing and other areas where the differentiated CRR was used. So there are options that the CBN can also use for single-digit lending. But of course, this is also going to be looked at holistically. Fiscal policy, of course, will be to create an environment that the banks will lend as cheaply as possible. But it all still goes down to the cash flows, just like Richard said, the outlook for the economy, what the kind of revenues or cash flows the assets will generate. I think those are the critical questions. The credit questions are more important, the business outlook, than the monetary or fiscal policy, as you put it at this time. So I think that would be my take on that question.
Okay, thank you. You talked about the business outlook. What's your bank's outlook for financing opportunities in the maritime space?
Okay, in the maritime space, apart from vessel financing, the bank has
Hello,
done
Mr. Ezekiel, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me? Well, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, Richard, can you hear me? I think,
Yes,
okay,
go
very
ahead.
good, okay. So as I mentioned, the bank has done a lot of financing in the maritime sector, ranging from shipping itself, port terminals, marine engineering, logistics. There's a whole lot in the maritime value chain that the bank has financed. And of course, being a Pan-African bank, we also play significantly in the other African countries that we have a presence. And also, of course, with our presence as one of the only African banks or deposit money receiving banks in the United States of America. So the bank has done quite well in terms of maritime business and is continuing to expand that space. Also, we're one of the 5 banks that will manage the CVFF. Of course, Doyin did not want to delve into that, but of course, we are hopeful that the financing will happen soon, just as approved by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. NIMASA and the Federal Ministry of Transport, as Kashima also mentioned earlier, are fast-tracking that. So we hope to see a lot of activity within the next couple of months.
Okay, one last question from me. What kind of ships, what type of cabotage ships has your bank financed? Or what type do you intend to finance? Do you have any specifics for us?
Well, I think it's, for now, since we're talking about cabotage, a lot of it will be the ships, all types of vessels involved in cabotage. If it is anchor handling tugs, supply vehicles, floating petroleum storage, dredgers, carriers, everything. So we've done financing.
Sorry,
yes.
Mr. Sharma.
Yes.
Following up with that question, and yes. I'll also invite Mr. Shobwale because you want to go into the CBFF realm now, and I've seen some questions on the CBFF. Do you actually, from what Kashima is asking, is there really a policy for what type of vessels you want to finance? Because the ports you have is limited, and you need to have a policy as to how you can do it. If you're going to do the whole gamut, then you probably will don't do one vessel. Once FPSO will probably suck up everything that NIMASA has. So we would like to know, is there a policy drive? What kind of vessels are you looking at so that the audience can know exactly whether they should look at CBFF or come to the other banks? Sorry, Kash.
Okay. Okay,
so I know Shama was going to go first.
Okay, is that for me? Okay.
Yeah.
No, I think
Shama was going to say something.
As far as the CVFF is concerned, all vessels for cabotage business around our coastal areas, inland waterways, are all eligible for this financing, if that's the question you're asking. Now, capacity is another issue altogether. But if that's what you're asking, the policy and the framework allows for all types of vessels involved in cabotage businesses. I'm sorry, Mr. Shobowale will back me up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed, Section 2.5 of the guidelines on the implementation of coastal and inland shipping Cabotage Act that was issued in 2007, set out a list of, vessels, ranging from passenger vessels, cruise vessels, to tankers and carriers. Of course, capacity is an issue, but I guess as we develop, the infrastructure, the port infrastructure around the country, I guess we don't now need to go back and amend the guidelines. So subject to capacity, we can finance any type of vessels.
Yes, Mr. Tuku, you are going to jump in. You wanted to?
Oh, yes. So my just to add to what the other panelists have said, I realized that some of these projects have to be analyzed properly. And what another mistake I would probably say I've seen with the banks is the banks are actually not talking to shipbrokers, which I think is quite critical in a sector like this, which means actually talking to the actual shipping professionals who can actually advise and also guide towards assets that you're actually financing, and also the long-term project that you're actually assessing. So that particular knowledge of the market is lacking, and I think that is also part of the reason why we have seen some of these some of these owners fail. For example, now despite the fact that most banks will require ships to a contract, it's also important to actually also look at the market and see that particular market and its prospects between a short to medium and also long term. So that was the point I wanted to make.
Good point, Bello. I know you mentioned what you just said ties in with what Mr. Enegbedon said when he was talking a few moments ago as to their look at the sports market. But Mr. Enegbedon, I wanted to ask you, Bello has talked about the new drive for newer vessels, which are looking at hydrogen, they're looking at new fuels and everything. And more importantly, sustainability. I know that was the first thing that was on Bello's front page. What is your bank's take as to sustainability in shipping? And it's also open to all the other people after Richard speaks. Is there a sustainability policy for generally and for the shipping industry, tying into what the IMO and other people are trying to do? Richard, please take the first step.
Yeah, thank you very much again for that. But before I get to your question, just a quick clarification around what Mr. Tuko said. Now, in this market, there is opportunity for syndication, right? So subject to the value or the obligor limit that every bank would have created, right? You determine what you want to do per customer and per time. The Act, from my review, indicates that there's a cap per customer. I think the maximum that a client can take under the Act is about $25 million. And if you look at the market today, that is the average price for a 15,000 metric tons wet tanker vessel. So there's limitation already in terms of what you can do with the fund. But again, within the banking framework, even if you have a vessel that is above that amount, every bank has its own risk framework and appetite per transaction. And again, there's opportunity to syndicate loans in this space, just to provide that clarification. Talking about sustainability, I think I'll tie that to our drive as a bank for net zero carbon emission. As an institution, we are totally aligned with the Green Initiative across board, and we are committed to supporting the drive for net zero emissions. We lend responsibly by incorporating international best practice, standards and environmental and social risk management framework that we've set as a bank. For instance,
Richard, you're reading the script for us. Do you have a policy for us?
Yes, we do. We do.
Sorry to interject.
Our policy is tied across two functional areas, right? So again, I'll go directly to shipping. That's one of our indirect touch points. From that functional area, our plan is to ensure that we achieve net zero carbon emission by 2040. And as of today, we carefully manage our lending to sectors that are intensive in carbon emission and fossil fuel. And the key lending parameters for us when it comes to vessel finance is that we look at the type of the vessel and the age of the vessel. I think Mr. Togo talked about the maximum age in this presentation. And from our own perspective, we typically are comfortable with vessels that are not older than 20 years. So between 15 and 20 years old vessels are the type of vessels that we consider. And there's a policy trust around emissions and all of that we work with brokers and industry specialists that gives us the reports that enables us to take our own investment decision. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so I'll leave it over to Kachimana to please ask, so then the benefit of our panel, our attendants. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So the first question comes from Mrs. Olushe Adejuibe, And her question is, for any of the speakers, in your opinion, do you reckon that the disbursement of the CVFF will make any impact on the maritime sector in terms of increasing indigenous tonnage? So anybody can attempt or answer.
If you permit me, well, my answer is absolutely. That's essentially the essence of setting up the funds. And since the federal government approved the disbursement and the engagement that the selected banks, which includes Union Bank, have had with NEMASA and other stakeholders, the intent essentially is to grow indigenous or local capacity in this sector. And so that's absolutely the focus. And we're expecting that in the next couple of years, we will see a greater footprint of local Nigerian players in this sector who are able to finance and acquire vessels and, essentially just contribute to the growth of the sector.
Okay, thank you very much. Someone else has a comment for Mr. Shoboali, Kemi Shumoyi. She says, I just want to state that it's now the aim of insolvency practitioners in Nigeria to rescue the business and not to necessarily wind the company up.
Okay, so my comment earlier is around the fact that, the principal obligation of insolvency practitioners is essentially to recover money that's been lent out. But I'm just saying that they need to have more bullets in their arsenal, So it shouldn't just be reduced to take over assets, kick out everyone, strip it, and sell. So where there are opportunities to nurse the business back to health, to replace the managers and hand them over to competent people to restructure, then certainly this should be under consideration. Because if you look at the flip side, you have an asset where you're exposed for, say, 10 billion naira, and then you go in, you do a fire sale and realize, 500 million naira. Who loses at the end of the day? But perhaps if you're able to hire managers, restructure, and that business, keeps running, then maybe the lenders can recover more. And of course, the net effect around the fact that, some of these businesses have employees. Government takes taxes from them when, they make profit. So if you don't consider other options, there are many losers in the economy. And many times you don't look at that. There are people today who are unemployed because, their owners or managers have run down the business. And in situations where those businesses could be revamped. So I'm just saying, essentially, let's, be broad-minded around, how we discharge our obligations to our clients when we're appointed as receiver managers.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Shoboali. We have a question directed at Mr. Sharma. It says, what is the attitude of the banks on project finance? Does the bank accept cash flow resulting from ordinary trade of the vessel as security for the money lent?
Okay, I think Richard spoke to this, but I think I'll just reiterate what he said. Capacity, project finance entails, of course, depending on the cash flows, et cetera, over the lifespan of the facility. I think Richard spoke to that. That is critical, but of course, banks will still require fallback. Secondary repayment source is critical. If everything fails, the market outlook fails, nobody's so COVID, for example, those things happen. There must be a fallback, and banks are required to do that. We are more of money market operators. I think people should always remember that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's in that question for everybody's interested in CBFF.
Okay. Yeah, there's another one.
What's the difference between a regular bank facility and accessing the CBFF? Are there no incentives that make the CBFF more attractive in comparison to the banking facility? Also, what rates approximately are the banks offering under the CBFF? Those two questions for you, Mr. Sharma and Mr. Shoboali.
Okay. There are incentives, okay? Though this is not finalized, it's still in the pipeline, but I think it will be okay for us to share what we think the proposition is. If the government approves it, that is another issue. But I think that it's still going to be cheaper. The proposition is that, you know, for the people, for those of you that have read the CVFF or have come across it, the 25 million that Richard spoke to represents 85% of the project costs, whether it is for the vessel financing or infrastructure development, et cetera, et cetera. The borrower is expected to bring 15% contribution to make it 100%. So now, of course, the 15% is not our money, or it's not the government's money, but the 85%, 50% of that money is probably going to go at less than single digits, which is less than 10%, okay, as is obtainable today with most federal government intervention facilities. And then the other 35%, of course, will be at prevailing money market rates or prevailing lending rates. The proposition is the SOFR plus a margin. So once that is approved, it will become public. But this is just a rough idea of what it will look like. Of course, if you are lending in Nigeria today, we know what it is. What we have said is almost half or less than half of that. Okay, I hope I've answered that question. I don't know if Mr. Shobowale wants to shed more light.
No, I mean, I just want to endorse what you've said. I mean, it will be a blended rate, and it will be, you know, cheaper than if you had just gone, you know, commercial the whole home. So, well, there was a second leg to the question that I don't quite remember.
It was in relation to rates, but I think you just talked about it as a blended rate. Well, I wanted to know what the minimum rate should be. So I don't know if you have figures like share minimum, maximum.
Okay, that's still been finalized with the different stakeholders.
Okay. Kashiman, I believe you have a question for Richard.
There's so many questions coming in.
The one on the NPL?
I can't see that one from here. Can you?
Okay. It says, thank you, Richard, for the elaborate presentation. It would be nice to share your bank's experience with NPLs in the vessel financing space.
Okay. In the industry, acceptable NPL threshold is about 5% of your loan book. And I'm happy to mention to everyone in the house that we are within the threshold, and as of today, we essentially do not have a challenge facility. And it speaks to, you know, the level of hold and the experience that we've gathered over time in the market. So to be specific, we are within the set threshold, and we typically do not have any challenge position as we speak. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a very tough question for Mr. Bello Tuku. Someone says, there's so much conversation going on about ship acquisition, and that's Adeswa Eriwela. How about ship rebuilding and rehabilitation of dilapidated vessels? What's your take, Mr. Tuku? And why should the banks not finance such projects? Let me add to that.
Well, that's a very tough one. I mean, a lot of this is all down to cost. 90% of success in this industry is down to cost. How you manage your cost effectively at the same time without compromising safety and standards of maintenance as required by your class. So as regards to rehabilitating and fixing vessels, it's always important to look at the history of every ship before you acquire. And that would probably tell you how that particular owner has looked at the vessel from the time it's built up until the time the ship is sold to you. Now, we have a few shipyards, around the coast of West Africa, where they have high standards with the class, and it's very, very important to actually maintain the vessel without getting to a level where it reaches where it cannot be repaired. So most ships, provided you keep it in class, I believe the major IX classes like DNV, American Bureau of Shipping.
Okay, I think Mr. Bello Tuku might have dropped off the call. Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
I think Mr. Tuku might have dropped off the call. So we're really thankful to everybody that came and showed up, both those listening and the panelists. Unfortunately, we can't take all the questions, but it's possible to send the email to the Maritime Committee, and then we will handle the remaining questions. Really, this Business Law Weekly is meant to be a 1-hour segment. I've already had an overrun of 15 minutes. So I think that it's expedient that we wrap up now. I want to thank Mr. Inegbedion from Stanbic, thank Mr. Shobo Ali from Union Bank, thank Mr. Sharma from UBA, and Mr. Tuku from River Lake. I extend my thanks to our SBL President, Dr. Adefulu, for staying with us throughout, and the support members of the team, Endurance and Rex. Thank you to my chair, Adedoyin Afun, and thank you for all the attendees of this Business Law Weekly. At this point, I would like to bring
our secretary, Mark, for all this hard work.
Yes, and our secretary, Mark Mailumo of NIMASA. Thank you, everyone. And I would like to declare the event closed.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Afternoon.
All right, then. Bye.
Thank
everyone.
you all. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye.
Good day, Doctor.
Well done. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kash. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Mr. Shomole.
Thank you. I appreciate it.